Hey, what's going on, guys? Ryan here from Somewhere in the Skies, and I just wanted to take a moment to read some Apple Podcast reviews of Somewhere in the Skies. From Rasbabu, they say, one of my favorite UFO podcasts. Always up to date, funny, and I like the personal account episodes. From Eastberg8, Ryan always provides a variety of topics and great guests to keep this podcast interesting. Really enjoyed the witness accounts. From Cliquot Beer, they say, great podcast. The host has an easy-to-listen-to voice. Great guests, too, and no one yelling over each other. And lastly, from LJ's Baby T, they say the guests and content cover many areas of the paranormal with fair and balanced content. It's informative and not the woo factor often on other programs. So I look forward to weekly episodes knowing it's not geared to extreme content, but true information that allows the listener to form their own opinions. All right, I just wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to rate and review Somewhere in the Skies on Apple Podcasts, which remains the biggest platform out there. So if possible, please take just a few moments to head on over to Apple Podcasts, search for Somewhere in the Skies, and please leave a rating and review. It truly helps independent podcasts get featured, gain visibility, and find new listeners. Thank you so much in advance. And as always, keep looking up.
You are now Somewhere in the Skies with your host, Ryan Sprague.
Hi Ryan and Somewhere in the Skies listeners. My name is Laura Sosa and I'm going to share with you a few of my experiences, UFO sightings when I was younger. One happened when I was around 8 or so, which would make the year around 1998. I was in Placerville, California, which is in El Dorado County. As you could tell by the name, it is an old gold mining town. So there was a lot less light pollution than you would have in a bigger city. We were camping out on the trampoline for fun. Best guess was summertime with my siblings and my aunt. And they had already gone to sleep and I was up stargazing, which is something I used to love to do and something that I still love to do. I had been up for a while and I remember just feeling very much connected to nature and the universe and just loving so much just to stare at the beauty of all these stars around me. And I felt like the longer I stared, the more my eyes were able to focus in on some of the stars that were a little smaller and further away. And I had all these questions in my head, like how far do they go, and do you eventually hit another world or heaven, or is that even how it works? It's probably not how it works, but I just remember feeling very much at peace and just so good. And at one point I was staring at this cluster of stars and 3 of them caught my eye, and I don't remember quite why, but I think they were just a bit brighter than the rest in the cluster. And right as I had the thought that, wow, those make a perfect equilateral triangle, right as I had that thought, those 3 stars shifted to the right in a kind of pivoting motion and began drifting to the right. And I just remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, like I was shocked and just kind of like caught my breath. And I began trying to wake up my siblings, like, wake up, look, wake up. But they would not wake up. And so I remember shaking my aunt and saying the same thing, just like, look. So she woke up a little bit, was a bit groggy, kind of looked up to where I was pointing and said, oh, okay, yeah, and then just passed right back out. So I just ended up staring at it by myself. So I kept watching these stars in a triangle formation just continue to drift off to the right. And I don't know exactly how long it was, maybe a minute or so, maybe a little longer, but they didn't seem to zip across my field of vision or anything like that. It looked like they were moving kind of slowly, but I don't know how far the distance actually was, so for all I know, they could have been moving quickly. But I had realized then that those weren't stars because they were moving. I was able to see the stars all around them and between them, so there was nothing blocking, between the 3 points. They really just looked like they were part of the cluster of stars. So I watched it until they seemed to disappear into the rest of the sky, kind of like faded into everything else. And I just didn't know what I had just seen. I was just amazed, and I was thinking, what could it be? Is it human? Is it non-human? I had looked through stealth books that my stepdad had. One in particular had pictures of things like the SR-71, which I thought looked so cool and sleek, and so I knew that the U.S. government did have craft that seemed to be very advanced, and so that possibility has stayed with me over the years. So it could be man-made, but it could be something else. And I also knew that I had a grandpa that worked for some aerospace company, and that I knew that he had helped build some type of craft, but I didn't really know too much about it, and later found out that he had helped build the Saturn V for NASA and the XB-70 Valkyrie for the U.S. Air Force. So I knew that those things were out there, but I just was a bit confused as to why they would be there in that small town. So I really wasn't sure what I had seen, but the memory is something that I still cherish. And even now when I look out at the stars, I hope that maybe someday I'll be able to see the same thing. I'd also remembered that I was told that I have some family history of others that did stare up at the night sky, but that's because they were at some type of watchtower post at Muroc Air Base, which is what Edwards Air Force Base used to be. So I like to think of that little family connection of staring up at the stars. I also found out later on that I had family members who had also seen anomalous things out in the sky. And unfortunately, someone who had passed away, and she had seen something out in the 60s. And while she was driving, it was a green light of some kind that was making strange angular movements, And she didn't tell me this directly. I found this out from her daughter, who let me know about this once she found out that I was looking more into UFOs. And I just remember thinking, gosh, I wish I could have had that conversation with her and asked her what she thought it was and what she thought what I saw was, and how that affected her, and how her religious teachings may or may not jive with what she thought about it now. But unfortunately, she didn't want to tell anyone. She kept it very quiet, didn't tell a lot of people because she didn't want to be seen as crazy. But I really wish I could have known how it made her feel, if she was fearful about it, or if she felt the same sort of excitement and wonder and curiosity that I did. So I'm very grateful now that we're able to talk about this and share our stories. And I'm just going to tell you another story about a different sighting I had at the same address in Placerville. This was early adolescence or so, and I was out on the deck staring up at the stars again, and I remember I was sort of spacing out a bit and suddenly realized that there was a light there. I didn't see it pop into my field of vision. I didn't see where it came from. It was just suddenly like, boom, it was there. And it was a lot fatter than any light from an airplane would be. So I don't know exactly how far out it was. It wasn't directly above me. It was a bit in front of me and above. And I remember just staring right back at it. It felt like we were kind of staring at each other. And I didn't want to look away because I didn't want to miss anything. So I just stared back. And I don't know for how long, but probably around a solid minute or so. And then it just streaked across the sky to my right. And this time a lot faster than the triangle lights had gone across my field of vision. So it seemed to me like it was moving pretty quickly. It didn't, zip out in an instant. I was still able to watch it as it streaked across the sky. And I don't know what that was either. I do know that commercial drones didn't seem to be readily accessible to the public, at least as far as I know. And so I really wasn't sure what it was, but it wasn't like anything that I had seen before. That reddish, orangish color. The light was contained, so maybe an orb. And I did end up telling someone when I went inside, and they were just like, that's weird. Kind of left it at that. So between those two experiences, it's just left me feeling more connected to the mysteries of the universe. And it's made me really grateful for shows like this and for advocates of UAP transparency, for the scientists that are collecting data and bringing it more out in the open so people can feel comfortable having these conversations that I wish I could have had with loved ones. And I just want to say thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my stories, and remember to keep looking up.
Hi Ryan, I'm recording this from Massachusetts. I want you to know that I've enjoyed listening to witness accounts since I discovered your podcast a couple of years ago. This is my contribution to show my appreciation. I have many experiences that would take hours to describe, and I'm pretty private about most of it. But here's what I am willing to share today. In 1978, I was hitchhiking home from a friend's house at around 10 p.m. The area was pretty undeveloped back then, and there weren't any cars coming along to thumb a ride from, so I was putting in a lot of distance on foot. I was on a paved roadway and had hiked at least a mile or so and was stranded in the middle of nowhere. I paused for a few minutes and was admiring the stars with the occasional plane passing over. It was a beautiful, clear night. At some point, a light came into view off in the distance in front of me and off to my left, which would have been the north. I thought it was another plane to begin with. It made a turn and now was coming straight at me. As it got to about 80 degrees off of vertical, it came to a complete stop. It looked like a giant Ferris wheel, about 3 times the size of a 747, and it had multicolored lights that would surge around its rim. It was not spinning. Being a fearless 17-year-old, I stood in the middle of the road and shouted, "Take me for a ride!" I paused for a moment as it hit me that this thing would do anything it wanted, or could do anything that it wanted, and maybe challenging it was not a good idea. This craft was several thousand feet up, but it still looked ominous. I ran off the roadway and hid under an oak tree. I had this internal struggle going on about whether or not I was actually seeing this. I put my head against the trunk of the tree, and viewed this giant UFO through the limbs, moving my head to where the object would be right at the edge of a branch in my field of view, and it certainly remained motionless. After 4 or 5 minutes, it moved a little and just vanished. Finally, a car came along and picked me up. I remember having the adrenaline still coursing through my veins and said, "Thanks for picking me up. Did you see anything unusual in the sky?" They said no, and not much else was said until it was time for me to get out at my driveway. I don't recall if I told my parents that night or the next day about what I had just witnessed, but did tell them. I was really surprised at the reactions from both of them. My dad, who was retired from the Air Force, told me there had been a fire back in the woods that night, somewhere near where I had seen that thing, and took me for a ride out there so I could point it out where it was at the time. Nothing came of that, but while in the car, he told me about a UFO encounter the fighter pilots had on a training mission while we were stationed at Pease Air Force Base. My mom got me aside privately to tell me that she and her sisters had a close encounter with a UFO back in the 40s while driving home one night. She said her sisters hadn't spoken of it since. I know they were just terrified. I would go on to have a near-death experience in a bad car accident in '78 also. Sometime after both the UFO and near-death experience, I started having precognitive dreams that sometimes would be about death. They usually come true within 24 hours of having them. I took an experiencer survey in 2017 because of the close encounters I was still having. The results showed that something like 33% of people having UFO experiences have also had a near-death experience. This was quite striking to me. As for the UFO in '78, I was both excited and afraid. I've had so many since then. To sum it up, I would say that I'm no longer afraid, but it's very isolating. I honestly don't wish contact with these things on anyone. Thanks for listening.
Greetings, Ryan. My name is Ann Carrillo. I live in Houston, Texas. I'm 70 years old. I'm a retired registered nurse. On Friday, April 11th, I was relaxing watching a movie on my computer when I heard fireworks. So a little bit later, I went out to look. I live close to downtown. It must have been at the soccer stadium or something. I don't know. So by the time I got out there, they were over. But I looked down the street and I saw something much more interesting than fireworks. I could see it from my porch, but in order to get a better vantage point, I walked about 40 yards from my front door. It was about 40 yards. The weather was clear. It was at a low altitude. I would imagine about the size of an SUV. It was to the east of my house. It hovered. It didn't move. It was a perfect isosceles triangle. There were red lights all the way around, and it just sat there. It didn't move for some time. Then suddenly the lights turned white, and it just glided off. It wasn't moving fast. It was just gliding. And it went southeast towards the airport. Part of it was obstructed by trees. But the weird thing is, when I went down there to look at that, when I was estimating how far it was away from my door a few days ago, I noticed that I didn't really see the trees as big as they are. I could see it gliding past the trees. The view was somewhat obstructed, but not nearly as obstructed as it should have been. So anyway, I stood there watching that, and suddenly, there was no segue, just suddenly, I looked up, and in the exact same location was another perfect isosceles triangle, also rimmed in red lights. And then it just sat there for a few minutes. It just sat there. No movement, no sound. And exactly like the previous one, the lights turned white and it just glided away in the same direction. Now, I am so disappointed that I did not have my phone on me so that I could record this event. But I didn't expect to see such a thing. You know, what was I to do? And once I saw the second one just sitting there, I thought, oh, maybe I can go back and get my camera. But the problem is I have severe psoriatic arthritis and I move really slow. How did I feel? I just felt calm. I felt blessed that I could see this. I don't know what it was. It seems like it was hollow in the middle. Maybe it was black, but I think it was hollow. I think it was just lights. So, at any rate, that's my story, fellow Earthling Ryan. Bye.
Greetings, everyone. Ryan Sprague here, host of Somewhere in the Skies. For over 7 years and more than 400 episodes, the Somewhere in the Skies podcast has always been free to listen to, but it's not free to create. So we offer several ways to help support our efforts and get rewards in return. If you listen to the podcast on Apple, you can click the subscribe button at the top of your Somewhere in the Skies feed to become a premium Apple subscriber. Or you can join our Patreon campaign with several tiers available. Both of these options give you the same benefits and rewards: ad-free episodes, early access to the main show, and bonus episodes and content. Help keep the lights on at the Somewhere in the Skies HQ, and help us continue to grow by becoming a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/somewhereskies, or by clicking the subscribe button at the top of your Apple feed. Thank you for your continued support, and keep looking up.
Hey Ryan, this is something I've been wanting to share for a couple of years, and it's something I felt like I could do now. So I just thought, why not? I've been listening to your show for quite a while, and I really like it, and I really enjoy when you hear other people speaking about things that they've experienced. So I thought I'd just go through some things that I find really strange that happened to me when I was younger, and something that just happened to me a few years ago, which led me to want to do this. So my name is Brett. I live in Edinburgh in Scotland. I'm 46 years old. But the things I'll say happened, there was 3 things that happened to me basically. One of them was in 1989. I was 11 years old back then. I lived in a place called Royboyston. This was just in the outskirts of Glasgow in Scotland. Back then it was like a housing estate, but it was still expanding. It was kind of in its early days. It was much smaller then, and at the centre of where we lived was this sort of heap of construction land. It was this big area where they would park everything, and we would set up little ramps and things for our bikes and play on it and things. It almost looked like a dump. It looked like a wasteland, but it was like great fun when you were a little kid. It's all houses now. It's nothing like that now. But this was in the summer of 1989, and so I was out playing. I remember it was quite late, around I think maybe 10:30 or something like that. Getting to play outside, like back in those days, was in the 80s, especially in the 1980s, was really common. Playing forests and fields around where we lived, and I was always on my BMX and things, and my parents didn't really mind. So, but yeah, I'm fairly sure it was a Saturday night. I'm sure of that. So I'm sitting on this construction site with 2 of my friends. There was these 2 twins that I knew that lived next to me. We're looking up at the stars, and it was a night where we could see a lot. I remember that we could see a lot of stars, and it was beautiful. So we spotted one star moving, and it started to move, and it started to move downwards. And I remember one of the sisters joking about it being a spaceship or a UFO. And I wasn't really into spaceships or aliens at that age. But they said something I now find really interesting. They said, let's wave at it and see if we can make it come down. So, I'm 11 years old. I'm not into any of this sort of stuff. I don't really know what's going on. But I started thinking in my head, and I'm looking at it, I'm focusing on it. And I see it moving, and it's coming, almost above us, and then it starts to slow down. And it's still hundreds of feet above us. It's not big by any means, but we could see the shape of it. It was a circle. It was like a Mexican hat, like a sombrero. It's the best way I could describe it. I know that sounds ridiculous. And then a swirl of lights spun around the edges, all different colours. And I remember we get really excited about that, and we were convinced it was saying hello, and it sped off. I got back home really late. I remember that. But my parents were having a party with the neighbours, so they didn't really get me into trouble or anything like that, because 1980s. The next few days in the summer, I would start to see a lot of helicopters, which I thought was really bizarre. And then I remember seeing a Chinook, the twin rotor military helicopter. My dad was the one that told me what that was, because I had no idea. I had to go back and explain it, and then he seen it. And it was kind of flying and hovering over one of the neighbouring fields. I don't know why, but it was really odd. I only ever seen one of them the entire time I lived there, and we lived there for about 5 years. Then a weird thing started happening where the phone would ring during the summer, during the day, and there wouldn't be anybody else on the other end of the call. My mum got really angry at this, and it was bizarre, but I didn't really think much about it until I was older. I still don't know if I feel sometimes like I imagined the flying saucer, but I remember explicitly, the two girls that I knew seeing it, talking about it, and reacting to it. But for some reason, it's completely etched into my memory. I don't know why. Then we moved to another area the following year, to a place called Hugginfield, which is next to a slough. And I started having some really strange things happening to me at this time. I think I'm just getting into my teens at that point. But I found these things kind of frightening and weird. The first was knowing the layout of this bungalow that my parents had bought before I'd even moved in. It was like weird deja vu. Like I knew the entire layout of the place. And I remember having a day where I was put my toys on a shelf, and I got this feeling like a really cold chill pushed right through me, and I'd literally jumped out in the sky. I remember leaping backwards, it gave me such a fright, because it felt like something had walked through me, like a ghost or something. It was really, really bizarre, and it really freaked me out. But the thing I remember most living there is, I'm still convinced that it was a nightmare, but for some reason I remember it more than any other dream, and I think about it at least once a year. So I was in bed and I was asleep at night, and suddenly I'm under the house. It's like I'm almost went through my bed and underneath the house, or it felt underground. I have no idea. But then I opened my eyes and there's a man and woman that are stood to the left of me. And they're kind of gone, but they're just people. But they're slightly older, but they have really long, straight, blonde, kind of grey hair. And I'm levitating above this flat stone bed thing, and they're chanting the words up over and over. They keep saying up, up. So I began levitating, floating, and I just remember being completely and utterly terrified, and I'm screaming. I remember the whole room. It was a room. It wasn't like a cave. It was kind of brown and orange, or brass or something. I don't know. But it just felt like I was under the ground. It felt like I was coming back up through my bed. There was no rocks or anything. But it took me a few weeks to be able to sleep again, because I was so terrified of it and I couldn't make any sense of it. But about after the age of 16, nothing ever happened again. That was it. I didn't see anything. I didn't have any spooky things or any weird dreams or stuff like that. But in 2020, not long into the COVID lockdown, where they started to open up some areas where you could travel in Scotland, I went bike packing with my ex-partner. We cycled and camped for around a week all along the west side of Loch Ness, which is essentially the West Highland way. It's a popular route for hikers, but you can also cycle it, but it's really tough because you go very high up. This was the first day in, and we were getting close to setting up the tent. So we cycled through these forests, and it was technically the beginning. And it was a really tough hiking route. I remember that. It was knackering. Especially with the bikes, but it was beautiful. It was stunning, and it was very remote. We cycled through Fort Augustus. I remember we were at the bottom of the town in Fort Augustus, and then started heading up the hills in the west. We got close to the peaks at that point. It was really quiet, really remote, and we found a spot and set up a tent. we didn't see anybody, like, for a couple of hours before we got to that point. Didn't see anybody once we were set up, because it was just so remote. And I think the closest place was still Fort Augustus, which was miles further down from, where we were camping. But the twos got woken up, it must have been about maybe 3 or 4 a.m, which sounded like this explosion. It's massive explosion. It was like an airburst, or it sounded like an aeroplane exploding directly above us. I think that was the first thing we thought had happened, and we were totally terrified. And I work in sound design, so I've got a really, clear idea of how sound works and can identify a lot of things like that. The closest thing I can see, it sounded like a snare drum with a huge decay that you would have if you were, trying to design it, but directly above us. Wasn't a sonic boom. I've heard plenty of those. And it wasn't a firework. I mean, I live in Edinburgh. I'm really used to the sounds of fireworks and a lot of pyrotechnics. It was strange. I don't know what it was. But we were frozen, like absolutely terrified in this tent, because we had no idea what it was. But the two of us refused to look out at the tent. But the whole tent got lit up. The whole area got completely lit up. And it was like daylight almost, but like a kind of greenish light coming through the tent. And we could see that there was like shadows being casted. We could see that it was moving. And it lasted for about 5 minutes, like this light moving across us and around us. And I just refused to get out of the tent. I was just terrified. And for some reason, the memories of these things that happened to me when I was younger just suddenly hit me again. I don't know why. And even stranger is the instinct was to go to sleep. We just wanted to sleep, like force ourselves to sleep, which we did. And I find that even weirder. So the next day, we're packing up the tent, we're putting the tent back in the bikes. We begin ascending back down onto the route. But we pass these 3 people. They're engineers for Scotland Water. They've got their van parked kind of halfway down, working on this pump. And, I pulled the bikes over and we started speaking to them. And I asked them, if they were local and if they'd heard the explosion last night. I was asking if there was a party, or if there was any controlled explosions around the place, if they were detonating things, because, it was so out of the ordinary and so weird, and the fact that everything was lit up. But they said that nobody would work at night. There was nobody around about that working. But then one of them, oddly, just said that they have campers that come up this route, have camped in the same areas, and said that they've heard and see UFOs, apparently, lights and things flying through the house. So he suggested maybe it was that, and that was not what either of us were thinking at the time. But it just sent a chill down my spine. Maybe it was a meteor, but the meteor, did they last 5 minutes, like illuminating a place like that? I don't think so. And why the urgency to sleep? A lot of it doesn't add up, and the fact that for some reason, the things I told you about earlier on, I was much younger back then, and they weren't really prevalent. Anything that not really at the back of my mind for quite some time, and they just came roaring back, lying in the tent, and then just this need to sleep. It's so bizarre. But yeah, that's what happened. I still don't know. I don't want to know, and I would never want to go under hypnosis or anything. And I don't know if these 3 things are connected, but for some reason they're really at the back of my mind now, and I can't help but feel like they are connected for some reason. But I try not to dwell on it. And really, I just wanted to get this off my chest. That's it. That's my stories. But yeah, thanks, Ryan, for doing Somewhere in the Skies, and it's something I really appreciate, and I really enjoy. And to be honest, hearing other people speak about their witness accounts is the only reason why this has made me want to do this. So thank you.
Hey, Somewhere in the Skies, it's Joshua Rose here. So I am here to talk about one of my dreams. I've had about 3 dreams in my life related to another world. And the first time was around sort of 7-8 years old. Now, I was brought up in a Christian environment and I believed in the Bible, and I was sort of taught that none of this was real. So for me to have this kind of dream and to start to question what we know at such a young age is very intriguing. So my first dream, I woke up and I was in a hospital ward. I remember feeling like I'm in a hospital ward. And there were beds in this hospital ward, a bit similar to ours, but I suppose they were a bit more stone, but curved, like they were more roundish, like long roundish sort of oval shapes. So they were in this room and there's multiple beds in there. There was no one else in there, just me. And I walked through this hospital ward because I felt like I've just woken up out of a bed, in all honesty. And I looked at the walls, and the only way I can describe it is being of a dark slate-like colour, but being of the texture and similarity to granite. It had like shards of glass or quartz in the wall. And I remember thinking within the dream, and saying to myself within the dream that this is not a stone of earth. Now, I walked over to the window and I could see the sky was like this pinkish red. And I do remember there were 2, I'm not sure if they're moons or planets within the sky. I do remember there was 2 of them though. And they're quite big, so they obviously were quite close to this planet. And I was overlooking like this city, and the buildings were made of stone, as if it was etched into like these pillars and mounds and hills, and this was their city. And there was a pyramid, I remember that, but it weren't like exactly like the Egyptian pyramids as such. I suppose it's more related to the Mayan pyramids and Aztec, like it was very like steps going up into the pyramid shape. And anyway, I was looking out this window, and there were like these forms of transport that were the size of planes and cars, but only they were really different. And I remember in my dream telling myself this is transport. So it was like sort of circular domes that are massive, but they were spirals, and it was made of like stone, but they looked like shells. And I kept thinking, I wonder how all these people getting in there, because obviously it's like a spiral. Do all people sit round in a circle? And I didn't know how it worked, but I remember almost a bit like a shape of an omanite in a way, but these giant transports were transporting people, and I remember that in the dream. And I woke up, and it led me to feel like there was something there. And there was something unusual at such a young age as well. I felt like it was a memory, in all honesty. I felt like it was a memory. And it left me with a lot of questions, and I've not really spoke about it that much in my life, in all honesty, because I still don't really know the answer myself, and I'm still exploring that answer. But growing up, I become very spiritually aware. I used to see spirit, and it kind of questioned, is there more to this world and what we know? And I started questioning the Bible and and understanding that there is more. There is other dimensions. There's planets. There's all sorts of things. So I've become like this psychic medium since then. And one of my other dreams that I had, I felt like was a astral travel kind of dream, because this one was very different. I ended up being in an aircraft, I suppose, or a spaceship or an aircraft, I'm not quite sure, but I'm in this craft anyway. I suppose it could be even a vehicle. I'm just in this vehicle. And I remember a figure sitting there, And it almost was like he had a magnificent headpiece on, but I don't actually know if it was a helmet or a headpiece or if it was a part of him. But it was like, you know, like you get the dragon fangs around at the side of the heads. It was kind of like that on his face. And I felt like it was a helmet at the time, but I don't really know. But there was like these orangey yellow colours it was made from. I didn't really see his face either. But anyway, what I found really interesting was my body could not take a physical form. I was being pulled, stretched, shrank, enlarged, and I just couldn't materialize in a way. And I felt like this was another dimension or something. And the figure told me that I should not be here and pushed me back. And I came back into my body and back into my bed, and where I woke up. And that kind of shook me up. And I did feel that was something like a travel, because that was not a memory link to a past. That was I shouldn't be there. So that was interesting. But my third one is very, very quick and very glimpse of images in my dream. But I remember being around about 9-10 foot tall, maybe a bit bigger, with these humongous giant feet, which were like 2 claws at the front. There was a claw at the back base of the ankle, a bit like a bird in a way. And I remember my skin being of this greyish blue, like a palish greyish blue. And I felt really, really tall. And then I woke up. So I feel like that was like a memory. So these dreams have had an impact into my identity, because I do feel that there is something within inside me that is trying to unlock these memories. And perhaps I'm not meant to remember, perhaps I am at some point in my life, but it's intrigued me. It's helped me to become the person I am, because I've got all these questions and I'm very open to the possibility of different universes. And something I really do find very interesting is I'm very drawn to the Orion Belt. And I feel like this life that is kind of in the direction, I'm not saying it is the planets of Orion Belt or the stars of Orion Belt, but I feel like that's the direction that I came from, which I find really weird and interesting. So yeah, that's my story, and I wanted to share that, and thank you for creating this opportunity to get that out. Thank you very much.
Please take a moment to rate and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever possible. You can find us across all social media by searching for Somewhere in the Skies.